Okay, I noticed that it's 5:30, so we are going to get started and we'll slowly let folks in as they join. So welcome everyone. For those, today's workshop is about community wildfire protection planning for the East Honolulu region of Oahu. And I am Nani Bretto and am one of the event organizers. This workshop and the larger project that it is part of is being led by the Hawaiʻi Wildfire Management Organization, and it is funded by the U.S. Forest Service Fire and Aviation Management, grant number 136. Additional partners include the State Division of Forestry and Wildlife, the Honolulu Fire Department, and the University of Hawaii. These entities will be contributing their expertise along the way and will also be signatories on the final document, along with the City and County of Honolulu Emergency Management Agency. So we do thank all of them in advance for their partnership. We also want to thank the neighborhood boards and Livable Hawaii Kai and the Camilo Nui Valley Firewise team for helping us get the information and the invitation for this workshop out across the community. We already had one meeting today at noon and we had a great turnout. So I really appreciate those folks helping to get the word out. Finally, we want to thank the University of Hawaii Cooperative Extension, Ecosystems and Fire Program for their decades-long partnership with us in analyzing fire patterns, impacts, and always helping us to disseminate wildfire information. Some housekeeping before we begin. The presentation portion of this meeting is being recorded. Please stay muted for the duration of the presentation, and then we will ask for you to come off mute during the breakout sessions. You are welcome to use your web camera or you can keep it off. The chat box is also all yours, so feel free to use it, post questions, comments along the way. And lastly, closed captions are available and can be accessed using your Zoom's toolbar. First off, briefly about us, Hawaiʻi Wildfire Management Organization. We are a nonprofit. We've been around for 20 years now and have been tasked to work with and on behalf of our fire and forestry agencies, our land managers, and our communities across the region. Over the years, we have become the state's primary hub of collaborative fire programs and information. Our vision really is for Hawaii's people and places to be wildfire ready and wildfire resilient. Also, in partnership with the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, we coordinate the Firewise USA Hawaii program. You can check out our website for lots of helpful information as it relates to fire preparedness and safety. And you can check the chat box for that link. So let's do some introductions. First off, I am Nani Bretto, and I am joined here by Elizabeth Pickett. And together we serve as Hawaiʻi Wildfire's co-directors. We also have Melissa Camara and Heather Forrester on the line, both part of the Hawaiʻi Wildfire team. And together we will all be serving as your workshop facilitators. We are also joined today by some additional partners. And if I call your name, if you don't mind giving yourself a wave. We have Dr. Clay Trowernick from the University of Hawaii. We also have Fire Inspector Kara Otsuka and Chad Koide from the Honolulu Fire Department. And we have Jeff Tanaka with the State Division of Forestry and Wildlife, who is the Resource Protection Forester for Oahu. And if you don't mind, I'll ask Inspector Otsuka to come off mute and maybe share a few words with us.
Real quick, I'd like to thank everybody for coming and zooming in. This is really important, especially to us at the Honolulu Fire Department, to prevent wildfires and prevent affecting any of your homes or even lives. It's our number one passion to keep all of you safe. Just to let you guys know, I do have another firefighter with me. His name is Daniel Andrade. So you guys might be able to, interact with him also. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Danny. Thanks for joining tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And if Jeff, if you could also come off mute and introduce yourself.
Hi, yes, my name is Jeff Tanaka. I'm the Resource Protection Forester for the Division of Forestry and Wildlife on Oahu. And I kind of oversee the fire program for our division, as well as being a resident of East Honolulu. So this is useful information for me, as well as to be able to give information to you guys.
Thanks, Jeff. I know you were with us earlier too, so I appreciate the time and energy you put into this process with us. And I do apologize if I missed anyone else out there, but we'll get to know each other more after the formal presentation portion. But for now, I would like to know a little bit more about who we do have on the call. So 2 things. First, if you haven't already done so, and if you have a device that allows it, I'd like for you to rename yourself on Zoom so that it shows up in your Zoom window. You can see on mine, it says Nani Barreto. And if we all have our name tags on, this will be helpful later on when we're in small group discussions and we can refer to one another. And if you're representing an entity or an agency, feel free to put that as well. And second, we have 2 Zoom polls, which are going to pop on your screen. Let's see here. I'm going to launch a Zoom poll with 2 questions. The first one is, how knowledgeable are you about wildfire in your region? And then if you scroll down, there's a second question that asks you to select the stakeholder group or groups that best describes you. And there's 8 options there, so you'll have to scroll down to find all 8 options. And I'll give you just a second to submit your poll.
Hey
Great.
Nani, sorry, I lost my poll. It disappeared on me.
That's okay, sorry. But we know you're here, so that's a good thing, and we know who you're with. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll for now and share the results for those that were able to respond. So it looks like on the call, we have a very diverse group of folks, which is great. You know, we have folks that are somewhat, very, and not at all knowledgeable about fire. So that's a great thing, especially as we start talking story in our small group breakouts. And then in terms of stakeholder groups, we have a lot of community residents. We have some firefighters or other first responders, educators, and some other things. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen. That gives us a good idea. It's always useful to get a pulse on the audience to see who from the community we're talking with. Okay, so next, a quick introduction, next screen, Melissa, as to why we are here and what we hope to achieve. First, to learn more about wildfire and what that means for the East Honolulu region, which we will do through a 20-minute presentation. Then we're going to ask for your help in generating a list of your wildfire concerns and recommendations for next step actions. And this is what we're going to do through some small group discussions, and that will last about 40 minutes. And finally, we're also here to make connections because, as you will hear many times today, it takes all of us working together ahead of time, like we are today, to get our communities and our natural resources wildfire ready and resilient. So now I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth for the more formal presentation portion of the workshop.
Okay, well, thank you, Nani, and thank you all for being here. We want to start off by framing today's workshop by showing you the boundaries for the project planning area. So you can see it's for the entire East Honolulu region, and the boundaries were defined by the neighborhood board boundaries. And you can see on the left here which neighborhoods are included in the plan. And then we want to talk for just a minute about why we want to make this kind of plan and go through this kind of process. So what's the motivation? What does it even achieve? And really, it all starts because wildfire threatens people and natural resources, and the impacts are from Mauka to Makai. And it's really important to get together to work on protecting what we love, what we need, and what is special. And the process is really useful because it allows us to establish together our shared goals and priorities. It frequently serves to catalyze action, and it helps us leverage funding and partnerships so that we can work together toward wildfire risk reduction, greater community and public awareness, and then in the long run, overall safety and protection of our communities and natural resources. So we wanted to also be really clear about what a community wildfire protection plan is and what it isn't. And so you can see we abbreviate this all over the place by calling it a CWPP. And the first thing I want to say is that despite plan being in the name, we didn't come up with the name. It's a national standard for this type of planning process. It has plan in the place, but it's not exactly a plan like some people may be accustomed. It's really a process and a mechanism for learning, sharing, prioritizing, and taking action together. So it serves as a guide that we can all use into the future. And while we do end up with a nationally compliant, signed, recognized document, the CWPP process itself is really meant to build a culture of collaboration toward wildfire safety, and also promote community member, government agency, landowner, rancher, farmer, elected official, all together kind of collaborative dialogue. And so one more thing it does is that once we have the document all completed and we have this guide in place that we've all co-developed, it opens doors for funding for wildfire preparedness projects, because having a CWPP in place makes an area and its people and projects and places eligible for certain grant funding. So we want to get this done so that we can already start taking that proactive action. And then the process itself allows us to create that list of next step actions and priorities that then we can all take part in pursuing. And finally, a CWPP also includes a hazard assessment for the area, and we've already done that. We've completed that, and this ends up being useful so that we can all use it to continue planning over time and continue implementing projects based on the risk factors, where the threats are, where the hazards are, et cetera. And I do want to point out that CWPPs are not binding and they're not enforceable, and there's no governing body or anybody going to make it happen. It's volunteer only. And so really it's to serve that purpose of being a guide. We've all collaboratively developed it and it's supposed to be useful, but the main idea here is that by shifting the culture around wildfire to one of action by everyone ahead of time together, we can optimize the safety and protection of our people, of our lands, of our water, all in this specific area. So that's why we're here today, to initiate this process of learning and being proactive when it comes to wildfire, and also to create this resource document that can be used over time to guide all of our collective wildfire readiness and mitigation efforts and projects. So really, this is not intended to be one of those plans that just sits on the shelf or satisfies some mandate that nobody looks at. It's actually meant to be this solid foundation and guide for long-term action by all of us and everyone who lives and works in this very, fire-prone area. But it will sit on the shelf if we don't use it. What we need is for everyone to learn about this and step up and get moving together on priorities and threats that are identified collectively and prioritized by all of us. So the next step to this, now that you understand what this process even is to just lay some foundational concepts for everybody so we can be working from the same platform. And so what we're going to do is give an overview of fire in Hawaii in general and in East Honolulu specifically. And then this way we can all move forward with that same basic understanding and context. So at the most basic level, the presence or absence of wildfire in an area depends on the dynamics of what we see going on with climate, vegetation, and whether or not there are ignitions occurring in an area. And in Hawaii, we have the perfect recipe for high wildfire threat. And that's because we have a huge occurrence of human-caused ignition. So only 1% of fire ignitions are caused by lava or lightning. The rest are from people. And as population increases, so do ignitions. We have increasing fire-prone vegetation, replacing forests and moving in around unprepared communities. And we have climate patterns like El Nino, La Nina, and we have drought, increasing drought episodes. And these are all creating high fire danger weather. And so in each of these areas, we're seeing an increase. And consequently, that's increasing the size and the frequency of wildfires. And this is true for all of Hawaii, across the entire state, every county, but that also includes East Honolulu and this area. And it's why we are now doing the CWPP here. to make sure that we can get this area covered. That being said, the top causes of wildfire ignitions are all human caused, and about 75% of our ignitions are accidental. And those are related to campfires, sparking equipment, and that can be small to large equipment, from mowers and welders and grinders to our aging power infrastructure. We also have a lot of ignitions from vehicles and from fireworks. And where those ignition sources match up with the highly burnable vegetation that we have, we experience fire. And on that note, at this point in time, we have over 26% of our state covered and invaded by highly combustible fire-prone vegetation, non-native, mostly grasses and herbaceous species. So you can see on the right side some of the actions that we can take proactively to address each of these issues. And we're going to dive into those in some of the coming slides, but there's a lot we can do about each of these pieces and contributing factors to wildfire. So, case in point about ignitions in your area, we are in the process of updating these records, but what we know over the 10 years of records that we have collected, we know ignitions are occurring across the whole of East Honolulu. And these, just so you can know what this map is, it's like a fire history map. And where you see the data points, those are places where fires were started. This map does not show the whole burned area or the burn scars, but it shows ignition points. And you can notice that where people have more access, we have more fires. And then also that those ignitions end up combining with things like drought, vegetation type, topography, wind, weather, and then that ends up determining where and how those fires burn. But those are the ignition locations. And then here is what on this map is a map of fire fuel. And fire fuel is what we call burnable vegetation. And this is what it looks like for East Honolulu. And these colors, I know that they may not be the easiest for some to see, but essentially what we have here is a map of vegetation that's been classified into very basic categories related to how it burns. And you can see that your region is dominated by herbaceous and woody fuels. And those pose significant risks to fire occurrence and spread, especially during dry, windy conditions. And then this next map is what it looks like again in real colors from satellite imagery, which you're probably more familiar with. But what I want to point out here is that your area and this area is a prime example of what we call the wildland urban interface, which is where communities and the built environment are adjacent to and intermingled among wildland areas that are filled with fire-prone vegetation. So these are all the factors that are influencing the fire occurrence and frequency that we see in your area. And that does wrap up the general fire details for East Honolulu, but we will break into small groups soon to discuss like specific concerns and actions we can take to be more fire aware and prepared and resilient given these factors. But to pave the way for that, first, we're going to provide some additional framing on how we can think about wildfire for the purpose of tonight's discussions and our activities. So our next slide shows an equation basically on how we think about fire, and we want to invite you to think about it in the same way. And this is just thinking through the causes and impacts. So like we discussed earlier, on the top there, you can see wherever we have a high number of human-caused ignitions, and those ignitions take place where there is dry, dense, unmanaged vegetation, we have a recipe for wildfire occurrence. And then that leaves us with impacts and work to do, which is what you see on the bottom, to protect our natural resources, our land and water, to prepare and protect our people and our communities, and to ensure firefighter lives and safety and effective response. So this way of thinking about fire lines up perfectly with the National Wildland Fire Cohesive Management Strategy. It's a mouthful, but basically folks across the entire country have gotten together to really figure out how to best make sense of all the things that need to happen to comprehensively address fire issues. And so they've carefully set up this framework, which aligns very well with Hawaii's framework for thinking about fire. And it makes sure that we address everything necessary to keep both communities and natural resources safe. And in the end, the summary here is that what we're aiming for are landscapes that are resilient to fire. They can withstand and recover from fire and maybe even thwart fire occurrence. We want to aim for communities that are adapted to the realities of being having high fire risk. And we want to make sure that we have safe and effective firefighting. And addressing all three of these in combination ends up being what will yield the prepared, safe, and resilient lands, water, and people and communities that we're all hoping for. So for the purposes of removing lingo and framing our discussion today, we've renamed the categories like as you see here. So we've renamed them to simplify to people and communities, and that does include the built environment. And we have land and water, and then we have firefighting. And I do want to point out that in wildfire readiness work, we often have to very specifically dispel the myth that all things fire are the responsibility of firefighters, and that the rest of us can just relax and count on fire agencies to do everything. We do want to state strongly here that firefighting is the very last line of defense, and that there is so much we need to do on other fronts to make sure that we're preventing ignitions, and that any fire that does ignite can't go very far or do much damage. And those are the parts that are up to all of us. And that's what it means to be wildfire ready and wildfire resilient. And that's what we're aiming for with this meeting, and why we're so thankful that you're here tonight to get started with us. So for this reason, we are going to run through some specifics about each of these categories before breaking off into our small groups, because we will have more intimate conversations about how we can proactively prepare and prevent wildfire issues in the East Honolulu area per category. So we're going to dive in so that you can start, thinking about what each of these categories might mean for East Honolulu and for your community. So the first category we want you to be aware of is the one of people and communities. And this, again, includes the built environment. So people, knowledge, awareness, neighborhoods, infrastructure, building materials, all the things having to do with people, infrastructure, et cetera. So the goals here in this category are to do all the things that we need to do for people, for everyone who lives and works in an area, to be as prepared as possible to prevent, to respond to, and to recover from wildfire. And that means being aware of fire issues and impacts. It means owning our roles and responsibilities and taking very specific actions in those roles. It also includes not starting fires in the first place, being very fire aware and fire minded in your activities, and also all the way through that individual responsibility to the collective responsibility of making sure we have a culture and legislation and budgets that lead to fire awareness and preparedness. So when you get into your small groups and discuss this category, you can focus your conversation on things like protecting homes, communities, historic and cultural sites, gathering places, municipal infrastructure, economic interest, raising community awareness, reducing human-caused fires, ensuring that everyone knows that they play a role in prevention, preparedness, safety, and just really building knowledge and capacity for all who live and work in an area to be part of the solution. So next up are some slides we put together so you can see what some examples of next step actions in this category might be, like what some project ideas could be that you might mimic or get inspired by for achieving the people and communities goals. And these are the types of projects that other people have done after their CWPPs that they've implemented as a result of having a CWPP in place that have been effective. So you can let these inform you and inform the conversations that we'll have in a few minutes that are specific to East Honolulu. So some examples include outreach and education, homeowner landscaping workshops, home fire safety assessments, things like that. And I do want to point out that many areas have prioritized working on new and improved legislation toward things like fire-wise development, increased brush abatement requirements and enforcement in and around communities, building codes, zoning, two ways in and out of all neighborhoods, emergency access roads, evacuations, advocating for increased budgets for fire agencies and groups that are doing wildfire mitigation work to reduce hazards. Other projects in this category involve businesses launching green waste removal days or projects in neighborhoods, increasing the enforcement of illegal dumping and abandoned cars, working on fireworks issues, things like that. That's all the people side of wildfire issues and impacts. So you can see here, there's lots of ways of increasing awareness and safety across neighborhoods and communities. And in the end, truly, it's usually a combination of approaches that helps get toward the protection and awareness goals that we're hoping for. So outreach and increase in awareness is a pretty huge component or a prominent type of activity that ends up falling into this category. So we did want to point out that if you don't already know, there are lots of us who've been working together for a long time to make sure that outreach and information resources are available for you to use, and they're up to date, they're ready to use. And some are digital, some are printed, but they're all available to you. And one thing you could do is think through how to make use of those in your areas with your schools, clubs, businesses, organizations, anything that you might think of in your area to disseminate these materials or to have workshops or whatever are great things to discuss in your groups. There are also probably some community action and training project ideas that might make sense for your community. So toward this, we will detail the Firewise USA Hawaii program opportunities at the end of today's workshop, so you can know more about that. Kamilo Nui Valley Mariners Cove is a great example of an area that has already moved forward in pretty powerful ways using the Firewise program. And we also want you to feel free to think of additional community action and training projects that you might come up with that make sense for your area. So that wraps up the people and communities, and we want to dive in and give you some detail on the land and water category in the same sort of format. So we want to start thinking about how we can take action to ensure that our lands and waters are resilient to fire, insect, and disease disturbances, because these are all interrelated with fire threats and impacts. And so this conversation can focus on what it's going to take to protect and restore landscape health and function, water quantity, water quality, watershed forest protection, habitats, biodiversity, conservation, all of those types of important things that need to happen. And that includes reducing risk of fire to the landscape so that things aren't damaged, but also managing the hazards that exist on the landscape, like overgrown weeds and unmanaged grasses. And then also thinking through sensitive natural resources and sensitive areas that need extra protection. And then thinking about the whole timeline, we want to make sure that we're preventing or treating post-fire impacts as well. Oh, sorry, my dog. So we're going to do this the same way, where we show you examples of next step actions for managing the fire threats on the landscape, just to give you some ideas and pictures of what's been done in other places. So you can keep these in mind also for when you have this conversation. And the first one really is like managing vegetation and mitigating the fuels is a really big part of wildfire mitigation to protect land and water. And this can be done in lots of ways: weed whacking, mowing, grazing, all sorts of ways of managing fuels. And then where you manage the fuels can be done to protect sensitive watershed forests, that can be done along community boundaries, even in patches across the landscape, to slow or spread fire that has been ignited. And sometimes you can even design the fuel breaks to add in or double up as access for land management or for firefighting purposes. So a lot of these things can be integrated. And so they're not all perfectly segmented into categories, but this is just to get us started and thinking about things. And then also in this category are actions like replanting native species that are less fire prone, installing fencing, working or creating volunteer programs to remove weeds or help with some kind of restoration activities. So that's the kind of conversation and project ideas that we're hoping that you'll start thinking through that might make sense for East Honolulu. And then our final category of thought is on what's needed to ensure that everything is in place ahead of time to support firefighting. And so while our emergency responders are already excellent at what they do, we want to always think about ways to support their efforts and make sure they have what they need, and that it's optimized and efficient and safe and all those great things. So this means making sure that the public and firefighters are safe by preventing injuries and loss of life. It means making sure there's adequate infrastructure like water, access, equipment, training, and even making sure that there are plans and partnerships in place. So some examples of projects that others have pursued in this category are the creation of area-specific, community-specific fire plans, increasing water infrastructure, and even improving firefighter access around communities and wildland areas. And then, like I said before, making sure there's collaborations, partnerships, agreements, and other things that are necessary in place to optimize the response. And there we have it. So back to the full framework where we have all three categories. hopefully now you have a better understanding about wildfire in general, about how we see it through the fire lenses when we look at the East Honolulu area, and then some goals of each of the national strategy categories that are also the categories we're using for Hawaii. And that wraps up the formal part of the presentation. The rest is really going to be your ideas, your priorities, concerns, and input. So I'm going to hand it back to Nani now, and then she can walk us through the next portion of our workshop where we get to listen to you and hear from you. What we want to do now is just let you know exactly what's going to happen from here, and make sure that you are aware of some resources that are available to you already to use. And so first of all, this workshop and the hazard assessment and final CWPP documents are all just the beginning. And we've discussed so much already about this, but really it does take everyone doing their parts to make sure that it all comes together nicely to protect the communities, protect lands and waters, and reduce wildfire impacts and their causes. So it requires us all taking action early, proactively, and then thinking about this together is the start. And then we're going to put all this together into a community wildfire protection plan. And while we do that, we will be continuing to consult with our agency partners, fire and forestry, and emergency response and emergency management partners. And we will incorporate everything that you heard tonight, discussed tonight, everything, all of that input, the hazard assessments into the required compliant CWPP format and get it signed off. And then once all of that is official, it'll be considered published. You'll have access to it, and you can use it to guide projects and proposals and your next step actions. And also it makes everyone eligible to apply for certain funding. So we're excited about opening the door for funding to assist and support the projects that you think of. So we also continue we want to continue to encourage you to take action around your own home, with your own family, with your communities between now and then too. And that, we wanted to make sure you know that there's a lot of resources available to help you get started. And on that front, we encourage you to visit the Hawaiʻi Wildfire website. Also, the Honolulu Fire Department and Forestry and Wildlife all have websites. We all collaborate together, so we share a lot of the same resources. And the Hawaiʻi Wildfire website, for instance, has a lot of helpful information that can support your efforts to get started around your house and home. We have webinars, fact sheets, action planning guides, student and youth materials, and more for wildfire safety, for preparedness around your home, your community. We also have resources for families, for teachers, for landscapers, for land managers and farmers, and more. So we wanted to make sure you know that that's available to you and you can look it up and find what might be helpful to you. We also lead we co-lead a joint project with the University of Hawaii called the Pacific Fire Exchange Program, and that has a website and additional information, training modules, fire science resources as well. So please visit our websites and sign up for our newsletters and our social media so you can stay aware of upcoming learning and risk reduction, hazard reduction opportunities. And so Nani is pasting the websites in the chat box, and we'll also provide them in the follow-up communications after this workshop. And then what I want to do now is pass it over to Nani, because before we get to our final activity, we want to make sure that you are exposed to and introduced to one of our most effective programs for addressing wildfire risk at the community level. We want you to know about this, make use of it, and understand what it is. So we are hoping that you really do make use of it. It's unique and impactful, and Nani's going to talk about it now.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to give a quick plug for our Hawaii Firewise program. And that's because during many of these community meetings, we have folks like you guys ask about how their specific neighborhoods can get more involved in wildfire readiness. And one such program that has been successful for many communities in our state is the Firewise USA program. And we bring that up now because many of you have even already expressed interest. So for those that don't know, the program really supports neighbors coming together to take wildfire preparedness into their own hands, working to increase awareness and and working to do hazard reduction projects together as a community. We at Hawaiʻi Wildfire, we support them in doing so. In the national program, it's managed by a global nonprofit called the National Fire Protection Association, which many of you may be familiar with as the entity that puts forth the fire code standards for the country. But essentially, the program provides a framework to help neighbors. Second bullet there is to get organized, find direction, and take action to mitigate fire threats around homes and communities. There are over 700 sites across the country, and 15 of those are in Hawaii. And again, Hawaiʻi Wildfire, we support them by bringing technical and financial assistance and bringing them to get together so that they can network and learn from one another and share resources. The next screen has an infographic, and it provides a quick glance at where our state's FireWise communities are located. If you squint your eyes, you'll see Oahu, and you'll see the one community there is Kamilonui Valley Mariners Cove. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what our FireWise communities have achieved as a collective last year in 2021. Again, in partnership with Department of Forestry and Wildlife, Hawaiʻi Wildfire supports and connects these 15 communities. You can see that there's a lot of volunteer hours that have been invested, a lot of homes protected, a lot of vegetation reduced thanks to this program. It really has been an effective way to sort of get on top of community level fire hazards, and it's fun and rewarding too. So, you know, and we like to offer a lot of support for our FireWise communities in helping them get projects done. So for those of you that are interested in learning more, you can reach out to us directly at Hawaiʻi Wildfire, and we will share information on how you can get started, or we can connect you to your FireWise group if you live in or around Kamilonui Valley Mariners Cove. And on that note of follow-up actions on the next screen, we also want to let you know that we made a survey to support any follow-up thoughts you have about what is needed in your area regarding wildfire. We know, that this workshop thus far might have gotten your wheels turning, but you may think of additional things later on. So we are going to put a link, thanks, Elizabeth, in the chat box, and we'll also include it in a follow-up email. And we do encourage you, to use it yourself if new ideas come up, but also feel free to pass this link around to your friends and neighbors and to others that weren't able to attend today's workshop. And we'll be sure to integrate all of their input and recommendations into the final report as well.
Okay, so now we want to share our official thank you and express our gratitude for your participation tonight and in the breakout groups and for listening to our presentations. And we want to thank you for the wildfire preparedness actions we know you're going to take once you leave here today. We've been working in this field for a long time. Our organization has been doing this for 2 decades, and we've worked with all our partners for a long time. And we know that this works. And we've seen really clearly that there is greater protection for the community when everyone participates proactively and collaboratively. So we thank you so much for coming tonight and being part of the solution. We look forward to a super strong future of wildfire preparedness in the East Honolulu area with you. And of course, before we move on, we want to give you our contact information one last time before we stop our close down the share screen and then do sort of like a closing activity. So I just want to say, please do reach out to us at any time. Our entire mission is to be of service to our communities and natural resources in protecting them from wildfire occurrence and impacts.